Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, December 8th, 2020, and we'll be talking about trade compliance software. We are recording this webinar. The recording and other materials will be made available after the broadcast. All participants are currently muted, and the Q&A feature is available if you have any questions. I'll answer questions throughout, and I'll take more at the end. One of the reasons that we're doing this webinar is I'm seeing software become an increasing trend in trade compliance circles. And I wanted to take some time to really talk through how that software impacts our industry and the work that we do, surface the conversation, and hopefully field some of the questions that you guys have. I strongly encourage everyone to surface your concerns using the question software, and we'll definitely have time at the end to tackle some of those. So some quick background on who I am and my company. Star USA Inc. is a trade compliance consulting, advice, training, and services company. We do in and outsourced trade operations for businesses. We help import and export, develop policies and procedures, do audits and disclosures, and we navigate things like HS, origin, value, and all those things you see there on the slide. We also interface with your brokers and forwarders, set them up to succeed with your business needs, and make sure that we can navigate that successfully. We also provide training in all areas of trade compliance. I do want to give a shout out. Our flagship customs broker exam prep course starts in January for the April exam. Those of you on the call that are interested in becoming a licensed customs broker, I would definitely recommend paying attention to that and making sure that you're on our mailing list. And you can just send an email to train@starusa.org if you're interested in that. A little bit of background on me. My name is Mike Easton. I am the president and general manager of Star Inc., a trade compliance education and consulting firm in Northeast Ohio. I've spent more than 15 years, coming around 20, in the field of import and export compliance, supply chain security, export controls, things like that. I focus on operational excellence, verifiable progress, and sustainable compliance. I do really enjoy helping make compliance less complicated for people. So today we're going to be talking about trade compliance software. We'll be kind of moving through the technologies in general, some of their applications, and then some strategies and practices that we can put into play inside of our own organizations. Technologies. So we all use various technologies every day to do our jobs quicker and more effectively. If you think back to your first day at your job, one of the first things that you would have learned is how to use your company's software. In today's day and age, we're all adapting to new tools and new tech, bringing them into our lives, both personal and professional, constantly. There's always a new thing out there for us to kind of learn and adapt to. And we do use software to get the most from our jobs. And more accurately, I think in at least the trade compliance universe, we're using software to do the most of our jobs. So it's not that we're getting the most out of it, but we're definitely doing the most by using these automation tools and the services that help us expedite and streamline the processes. I've noticed today a fairly alarming trend that is encouraging us to put more and more trust in our tools and technology. For some of us, that means perhaps forgetting what we learned that made us effective as trade compliance professionals in the first place. They keep piling more and more onto our plates. We're asked to navigate more and more challenging scenarios every single day. And sometimes we're forced to automate in order to keep pace with what's going on. And I think in that process, we tend to forget that software isn't actually all that smart, despite claims to the contrary. Software can do a lot of things, but all the features and all the controls that they have, they're not going to think for us. And that's an important thing to recognize in our industry, that role of thought and knowledge. We're in a knowledge field, and that's an important thing to recognize, that it takes to do our job correctly. It's real knowledge. In trade compliance, that knowledge absolutely involves regulatory awareness, sound procedures, recognition of federal programs that are out there, what they mean and how they apply to our businesses. It also means knowledge of the tools that are available to us, what they can do and what they can't do. Hopefully we'll be kind of unpacking a lot of that today and creating a conversation there. So some of the types of technology that I'm talking about in today's webinar that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, one of the major ones are the ERP systems, the Enterprise Resource Planning Systems. I'm talking about things like SAP or Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics, AS400 if you're on the legacy stuff. There's literally hundreds of different ERP systems, and there's even homegrown ones that people have implemented for their organization. Some of these have been in use since the 90s. Some are brand new in the last couple of years. And those of you that are on some of the major ones recognize the lack of versioning that exists and how there's a breaking change between one version and the next. But all of these ERP systems are customizable to some degree. And that provides us some advantages and some disadvantages. Moving more into our industry software, global trade management software exists in the marketplace, and there are a lot of different variations on this. Some of the most notable names that I see in play a lot are Amber Road, Descartes, Integration Point, and then SAP, Oracle, and other ERP systems will have their own extensions that are meant for global trade management. Some of these GTM softwares perform a role within the scopes of logistics. Sometimes it's regulatory compliance. Sometimes it's just other import-export information management. But it's important to recognize that there are a variety of different tools out there that exist. And on top of those, we've got other tools and software. The external tools that exist out there on the web or that are just separate from your own internal systems, they may directly link with your systems. They may have a one-way or a manually operated feed to transfer information back and forth. And there are also a lot of ad hoc and tailor-built solutions that perform very specific roles depending on your company's need. And then there are some tools out there that are provided by federal agencies, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. There are, just a real quick note, the global trade management software, a lot of those can be integrated directly with ERP systems so that they actually exchange data back and forth constantly and are actually dependent upon one another in order to succeed. I've seen a lot of trade management software store things like HS codes or countries of origin and feed that directly into the ERP system so it can end up on the invoices that are generated by the ERP. And then sometimes the GTM software kind of runs alongside and it pulls information out of the ERP system and maybe it feeds some back in, but it's not quite a live link. And some of the roles of technology in trade compliance. So these are some of the more frequent applications. These technologies can range from purely informational or representational to full-on decision engines, including interpretive searching and lots of different interfaces and uses. The most common ones I see are HTS classification and restricted party screening. Then the tools exist to either help you make a decision on either of those two things or at least provide you with enough information so that you can arrive at your own decision. ECCN determination, there are some tools out there that help you identify whether your goods are controlled for export. AD/CVD case searches are made available by CBP, and you can dig through that. And there are some other services that aggregate AD/CVD cases and allow you to research those. There are services that allow you to aggregate cross rulings as well and allow you to bring those a bit more searchability on cross rulings. There are a lot of free trade agreement management softwares out there allowing you to manage the entire process from solicitation through analyzing the BOM for compliance with a trade agreement and managing the customer request systems and even issuing the documents. There are myriad services for creating invoices, shipping documents, things like that. There are some new CTPAT and supply chain security softwares that are on the market that are providing a lot of new features. We have one that I think is fantastic, allowing for a global assessment system. Lots of tracking tools that exist for tracking your shipments, tracking your incoming requests, jobs in queue, system trackers, workload controls, a lot of different tracking involved in our industry. And then there's the filing software that allows you to interface directly with a federal agency, the ABI software that brokers use, which is the automated broker interface, which has hundreds of different variations. And a lot of importers do their own self-filing, so they have their own ABI software. And then there's the automated commercial environment, ACE, which allows you to interface directly, allows any importer to interface directly with customs using that interface, where you can respond to CBP 28s and file protests. You have a lot of tools available to you there. You can also pull reports out of ACE so that you can get the picture of how customs sees your import activity or your export activity. And the AES system, which is also within ACE, allowing you to do your own filing of EEIs. And then there are countless reporting tools, SAP Business Warehouse, just Crystal Objects, and there's hundreds. So I want to kind of get that baseline established of what exists out there in the universe to kind of make sure that we're considering how each of these comes into play in our professional lives. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the application of these resources, how we can actually put them to work for us, and where their limits are. So one of the key adages I read recently from Tony Hare, who is a computer scientist. He says that there are two methods in software design. One is to make the program so simple there are obviously no errors. The other is to make it so complicated there are no obvious errors. And I find that to be a fairly true representative of the software, especially as it gets more and more complex and it does more and more things for us. It's very, very hard to tell where the mistakes are. And that can come back to bite us, particularly in this trade compliance arena when we're dealing with regulatory controls and legal matters. So trade compliance software is often marketed as a solution, but that begs the question, what problem is it actually solving? And the way that I like to think about it is the problem being solved by software is one of accessibility. It can't solve the problem of doing the work correctly, accurately, or reliably. It can only make it more accessible, more streamlined, more quick, so that we can get more done in less time. Software can bring us to a range of possible solutions, but it can't think or decide for us. And the logic trees that it follows can definitely lead us in the wrong direction. So first and foremost, ours is a knowledge field. We are tasked with finding solutions, and the software is the vehicle that can help bring us to that solution quicker, but we are the ones in the driver's seat and responsible for that navigation. Even the smartest cars can take you to the wrong destination. So I want to kind of expand on this a little bit. Consider what happens when we put a tool in the hands of an unskilled person. And ignore software as a concept here. Just consider any tool. If you give a hammer to a toddler, at best, they're going to use it ineffectively. My son was recently a toddler, no longer is, and he's not very good at using a hammer. He doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have the knowledge. So at best, he's going to make mistakes with it. At worst, he's going to hurt somebody. And that's why I don't give him hammers. Another example I have is I took driver's ed when I was a teenager, which is many moons ago. And I remember my first lesson was in a classroom, and they didn't give me tools straight away. What they gave me was a book on the rules of the road. So that was the first thing I had when I went to driver's ed. And what they did right after that was they sat me down and they taught me those rules for weeks before they ever put me behind the wheel. And then when they finally did put me in the driver's seat, there was someone with me for hours upon hours, helping me apply the lessons that I'd been taught and how to recognize when they come into play in the real world scenarios. In that buildup, being given the tools so I could do the research and the reading on my own, being given the instruction verbally and I guess Blackboard, helping me understand and interpret those rules, and then giving me the guidance in real world scenarios to help me navigate those situations, helped me become a responsible driver. Every time I meet somebody new in the field of trade compliance, I'd like to ask them how they actually came to work in this field. It's a kind of a quirk that I have. I want to figure out how people found the field and how they got here. And without fail, the answer that I get the most often, actually virtually every time, is that people are in this field by accident. They didn't choose it. They didn't try to become a trade compliance professional. they took the job because somebody was hiring and there was a paycheck at the end of it. Okay, that's a good reason. And some of us stepped into trade compliance in order to help out our colleagues. We were in the same office area, and somebody was having a problem. We stepped in to help, and before you knew it, we were here for 10 years. Other people have been assigned the role by their bosses. There's some sort of problem. They needed somebody trustworthy to solve it. They said, hey, I need you to solve this problem for me. And lo and behold, they're now a trade compliant professional. But generally speaking, almost nobody actually studied trade compliance in school. In fact, most schools don't have any form of trade compliance as a class that you can take. The closest degrees I've seen are international business, but business and compliance are often at opposing ends of that spectrum. And some things that are really good business decisions are really bad compliance decisions, and vice versa. It's very easy to cost yourself a sale because you're trying to be compliant, and that compliance requires you to not make that sale, which has that conflict there that are inherent. So honestly, some of the most talented people that I've worked with in this field have had degrees in things like art or Spanish or social work. I know a guy with a doctorate in wood technology, and a lot of people that have no degree at all. The point being that we're all kind of in the same boat, trying to do the best we can with what we've been given. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you're given a tool that you don't know how to use, you're going to use it incorrectly. And that's the takeaway that I want you guys to have from that slide. So here I want to give you an example of misuse of a tool. This is an HTS decision tree example. And hypothetically, your company makes a custom steel piece for a household storage water heater. Prior to exporting, your engineering team used the Census Schedule B search engine to find the HTS classification, the Schedule B classification for this steel piece. And they type in steel piece for heater and hit the button that says classify. And there's a screenshot on the page so that you can see that it actually says the word classify on there. And this is a tool provided by the Bureau of Census, part of the Department of Commerce, that's necessary for export compliance reasons. They hit the classify button. They're prompted to select alloy or non-alloy. They choose non-alloy. They choose an angular section from the next set of questions, and they choose a flat roll product from the prompt. And they're provided a classification of 721691-0000, which is angles and shapes and sections of iron or non-alloy steel, other cold formed or cold finished from flat roll products. Had they instead entered the words steel part for heater instead of steel piece for heater, they would have been led down through the decision tree to arrive at 8516909500, which is for electric, instantaneous, or storage water heaters and immersion heaters parts other. So this is a representation of how different a classification you can get. You're moving from chapter 72 to chapter 85, which is worlds apart. It's different sections of the tariff by just changing one simple word, and helping to illustrate how you can arrive at a very different decision because the tool doesn't know what you're trying to do. The tool can only provide you options. And this tool in particular didn't show me the other options. There's nowhere to get to 8516 by typing in steel piece for heater. So I now want to have another example. This is a case study on restricted party screening, RPS. This is also called denied party screening, the consolidated screening lists. In this case, a U.S. company rep negotiated a sales transaction on an export of a waterway barrier debris system, which is designated as EAR 99, so not controlled for export purposes. The buyer was an agent in India that was facilitating sales in the region for this U.S. company. The goods are going to be drop shipped to the buyer's requested destination in United Arab Emirates. And from there, they're going to be transshipped to Iran. And the buyer sent an email titled Iran shipment, which Iran is you cannot just sell to Iran carte blanche. You have to get licenses to do so. There are sanctions on Iran that come in and out. So the order that gets entered into the ERP system on the US side has a sold to address in India and a shipped to address in the UAE. From that entry in the ERP system, a shipper's letter of instruction prints out, or they complete a shipper's letter of instruction, an SLI, and they provide that to the forwarder, who files the EEI with an ultimate destination of the UAE. The automated RPS screening that is attached to the ERP system runs through the screening, sees only India and only UAE as destinations, and comes back with no flags, because you're allowed to ship to and sell to India and the UAE. But the goods, in this case, were seized by the government agents when they arrived at the US port for export. So in both examples, the software was used correctly and provided results that were actually in line with reasonable expectations. But something went wrong. So what went wrong? In the first example, the human using the tool was not equipped to recognize the limitations of the software. The engineers likely do not have training in HTS, and that led them to arrive at an incorrect conclusion, because they didn't understand the differences in how you can classify things, and when the word part has a very specific meaning within the HTS. In their lexicon, piece and part are interchangeable words, but in the HTS, they are not. The part has a very specific meaning. And it's a very, very simple difference. And somebody without training would not have recognized that they arrived at an incorrect conclusion. In the second example, the ERP system only had two fields, sold to and shipped to. And that's very, very common in most ERP systems. As far as the US company is concerned, those are the only players in the transaction. They're not dealing with the end buyer in Iran. They're dealing with their agent in India. And to create the order, you don't need to mention Iran. So they created the order as they're supposed to, and those fields were screened, and it did not catch that Iran was a problem part of this transaction. The problem here is that federal regulations don't care how your software is designed or what its limits are. Your rule is do not sell, do not ship, do not allow this transaction to occur. It's just do not. They don't care how you arrive at that conclusion. And just a little bit of context on the Iran shipment, that's a real example. This happened back in 2008 to 2011. The U.S. company that was involved here is located in Canton, Ohio. The case was actually a lot more problematic than I made it out to be, but the fact remains that the U.S. shipment paperwork had no mention of Iran, despite the U.S. company having direct knowledge that the ultimate destination was Iran. In the case example, the sales agent actually took a much more active role to get it to Iran. He was working hard to work around the restrictions, but there's no way to tell from what was entered into the ERP system, what was screened, what was created on the documentation, that this shipment was prohibited. The agents found out anyways, and were able to put a stop to the shipment. So basically, the lesson here is garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure many of you have heard that before, but it's important to recognize that the garbage could look good. It could look like good garbage, but you're still getting very, very bad results. And in the case of the Iran shipment, there was $100,000 in fines. 2 people got added to the sanctions list. The buyer in India and his company were both added to the sanctions list, and he is no longer allowed. You're no longer allowed to sell or ship to him or his company. So I'm noticing some trends here in the trade compliance world, and one of the most impactful ones are increasing demands. And with that comes that increasing pressure to automate, which alongside that comes a justification to turn a blind eye and in some cases not ask key questions. Hey, wait a minute, this email says Iran in the subject line. Hey, wait a minute, maybe there's a different way to frame this search for this HTS code that might give me a different answer. We have more and more complex and precarious positions that we have to navigate. Those of you that have been in the field for the last couple of years recognize the new tariff rules that we've had in place with 232 and 301 and the complications that came from that. The new trade agreements USMCA just launched a few months back. We've had sanctions change repeatedly over the last couple of years. We've got global markets that are expanding. A lot more countries are getting sophisticated and more equipped to buy more product, and that means increased demand for sales to new regions. This year, I'm seeing a major uptick in mergers and acquisitions, which creates a lot of complication where uh, already stretched thin resources are being asked to cover more and more ground. And then there's just less resources generally available. So it creates a really a perfect storm for us to make mistakes. And, I'm also seeing much more robust software. It's true that trade compliance tech has for a long time been in the dark ages, and people still using blue ink and carbon paper and filing things in triplicate. We've moved away from those days, but up until the last couple of years ago, we really weren't making big strides. But all of a sudden, we've had an explosion in what kind of tools are available to us and what they can do. Electronic formats are increasingly recognized as legitimate by customs agencies, which creates way more opportunity, opens way more doors for new tools to be innovated and put into the marketplace for us to use. More providers are coming out of the market. There's been a lot of buying and selling of tech companies, in fact, in the global trade management space over the last couple of years, which has led to more investment, more capital being thrown at these tools and resources. And there's a lot of new features out there. And if you read the spec sheets and the feature sets, they promise to solve a lot of our biggest problems. But going back to what I said earlier, the software is not solving our problems. They're creating a vehicle for us to solve our problems faster in many cases, but they can also just as quickly lead us to the wrong decision, which brings the point up of trust but verify. Absolutely, today, software plays a substantial role in virtually every industry. You have to use software. There's no way around it anymore. But you have to remember what it does. It allows you to do more of what you're already doing. If you're doing something wrong, you can do a whole lot more of that wrong thing with software. And it's important to be aware of that. As these new softwares come out of the market, as you see the feature sets, as people eye the promise of automation, by all means, explore those opportunities, but you have to be smart about how you weigh them. It may be necessary to do more work in order to keep up with your industry, but software is, in my opinion, a poor substitute for adequate resources. If you can get both software and more resources, by all means do it. But a lot of times there's a cost. There's a cost to those things, and if you have to choose between tools or between people, pick people every time. When it comes to trade compliance, because we're not in a transactional world. We're in a world where we have to be correct. We have to be in compliance with the regulations. One of the other concerns with software that I've seen lately, and just in general over my entire life, software teaches users to trust it. It teaches you to rely on it. That's part of the hook. That's part of the reason people like it. And in the world of trade compliance, that's kind of a scary trend. We don't want to be in a position where we're trusting, especially trusting blindly, the tools that are put in front of us. If you have to put your faith somewhere, if you have to have trust in something, trust in yourself, build yourself up to be that knowledge source. Let the software handle the mundane pieces, the document generation, the storage of information, some of the automated pieces, the rote stuff. But rely on yourself to be the knowledge resource. Don't allow your software to be the knowledge source for you. That's how you set yourself up for very big problems. Okay, so we're going to move into some of the strategies and practices that I think are available to us, and how to decide on which softwares are going to be more impactful for you. And again, I'm not going to recommend any specific software. Every situation is unique. The customization options that exist are too varied to recommend. But if you do have a question or something you want to kind of throw out at me for me to weigh in on, please do so. One of the most important things when deciding on software is the regulatory imperative. I've touched on this already, but the underpinning of our roles, whether we're explicitly a trade compliance person or not, maybe we're in logistics, but we're having to field the trade compliance decisions, we have that regulatory imperative. We may not violate the federal laws that govern the import and export of goods. Beyond that, you've got pretty much carte blanche on what your software can do for you. As long as you're not setting yourself up setting the software up to be the decision maker on what the regulatory aspects of your shipments are. One of the things I recommend people do is clearly state the needs of what the software has to do for them. So that means, in my mind, that means defining your own feature set. So what is it that I need this to do for me? Do I need it to store information? Do I need it to decide information for me? Do I need it to be in the hands of all of my users? Is it only going to be for me and my team? At least in broad strokes, define that first. Create your feature list, and then go looking at the marketing lists of what the software can do. Don't let yourself get swayed by the promises of solving all your problems, tackling every solution to every problem that you could ever possibly have. Know what it is you need to do, and use that as your baseline for considering software. And it's important to remember that software will not do anything that you cannot already do without it. It can only expedite your process. It can only make it quicker. Software does not bring forth some brand new outcome. It's only going to strengthen and help you make the same decisions more quickly and more frequently for your transactions. The other thing that we need to have in place as trade compliance professionals is adequate training. This is a knowledge field. Software does not provide that knowledge. That knowledge comes the way it always has: research, training, and experience. Think about my driver's ed example from before. They gave me the rule book. They told me the rules and what they meant and how to understand them. And then they put me in a controlled scenario to build up my experience on the road. In trade compliance, you've got a rule book. The rule book are the customs regulations, the harmonized tariff system, those sorts of resources. And then there are dozens of training resources that exist out there. We're one of them that help you understand and interpret those rules that are written down for you. In worst case scenario, those the courts. But you can use the rule books that you're given. You can use the training resources that exist. And then your job is going to give you plenty of opportunity to practice those skills, hopefully in a more controlled environment. But more and more often, I see that with less and less control, and we have to be our own layer of control. But it's important to learn the skills first, and then let the software support you in your efforts. And lastly, we need to have an audit and accountability program. Going back to what I was saying before about that controlled scenario, if you are not in a controlled scenario, you need to create your own controls. And one of those, the key methods there is to define an audit regimen. The most important thing for any audit is to have it be structured. You need to be targeting specific intentional areas of concern. In order to create that list of areas of concern, I think you should consider things like the Customs and Border Protection priority trade issues that they publish and they make as one of their key audit vectors. Your company's policies. You may have internal policies that prohibit you from doing business with certain countries that are not on the sanctions list. That's entirely possible. Or certain industries that you need to steer clear of. Recognize where you're weak personally, where your company is weak in terms of international transactions, in terms of trade compliance, and make sure that you're focusing on those weaknesses. Look for repeated patterns. Identify something that happens 1,000 times a day being a key vector for risk, but also recognize the outliers, those things that only happen once a month, and try and pick between those things that are happening most frequently or the least frequently. Get in the habit of doing routine self-audits. Question yourself, question your methodology, document your methodology. I really do like the practice of writing down the thought process that helped you arrive at the classification or the methodology that you use to clear a particular party or a particular company on the RPS lists. One of the most basic accountability tests with regulatory compliance is the concept of defensibility. And that's basically asking the question, would a reasonable person examining the situation agree with your actions? So did you take shortcuts or did you blindly trust the system just because it was easier and quicker? Or did you actually create a methodology that you followed, even though you may have not had the perfect outcome, you at least had a reason for arriving at that decision? And is it defensible in the eyes of customs? Is it defensible in the eyes of a reasonable person? Implement randomized audits and randomized checks. This is to help you catch your blind spots by focusing on the unfamiliar areas. Randomized audits allow you to see more than you're typically paying attention to on a daily basis, and it will help you round out your overall trade compliance program to ensure that you're not leaving any areas untouched or uncovered. I've worked on software development and software integrations many times over my career, and I can promise you that the developers of these software, of the tools that are out there, they mean well, but they're applying system logic to what they're doing. They're using if-then statements in logic like that, and there's no practical way to account for any scenario where if this happens, then this happens. And I can guarantee that the software developers have not considered all those scenarios. Number one, because 99 times out of 100 or more, they're not going to be familiar with the scenarios in the first place. And even if they do have access to somebody that is familiar with those scenarios, they're not going to be able to come up with and plan for every different thing that happens in your universe. So at the end of the day, somebody is going to be accountable for the integrity of the system. And in most cases, that's going to mean you. And this audit and accountability program is going to help you take that next step towards ensuring that the software is not making decisions for you, that you have made decisions intentionally and with proper support for those decisions. Using priority-driven auditing allows you to make sure that you're covering your largest risk vectors, making sure that they're thoroughly vetted. The Pareto principle of 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes is another key way to prioritize what you're going to check. And then you also need to consider auditing your service providers, your forwarders, your customs brokers, your EEI filers. Anyone that's involved in the transaction should be subject to audit because they're acting on your behalf, and you as the importer of record or you as the US PPI are going to have responsibility for what those service providers are doing on your behalf. And recognizing how those come into play is going to be critical to knowing if all the right things happen so that you don't find yourself at the other end of an audit from a government agency. And I can promise you that government agency audits are far more costly than doing it yourself. I can tell you that doing a disclosure is far more costly than doing routine audits. So you want to be able to create these controls to hold yourself accountable, to keep your company in the clear, and to keep your own butt in the clear. So I'm going to give you guys some of the resources that I know are out there for you to use, and then we'll move into questions shortly after. So some of the public resources that exist, the US ITC has an HTS search system available to go through the entire HTS US. The Census has a Schedule B search engine, which I highlighted some of the limitations of that system earlier. There are the cross rulings that you can search through on CBP. And there are, again, third-party tools that you can use that do all of these things as well. The BIS puts out the consolidated screening list so that you can search for restricted parties or denied parties or sanctioned parties, however you want to call it. There are like 14 or 15 lists that are consolidated together. You can search all at once. And it does have fuzzy search, which I require my clients to turn on. You can do anti-dumping and countervailing duty searches at the ADCVD web search. And again, these slides will be provided to the attendees after the webinar, so you'll have access to these links. I know you can't see what the links are without having the slides, so we'll make sure we get those to you. And you can also use the ACE tools that are out there. They're free to use. All you have to do is register with the CBP in order to get your ACE account. Not the easiest process, but it exists. And there are private resources that exist out there. These are ones that I use on a frequent basis. Obviously, I use Star USA because that's us and we're the best. And if you're interested in some of the trainings that we have our past trainings on our website that you can go look at some of those Incoterms and USMCA, prior disclosures, free trade agreements, things like that. The WCO publishes the explanatory notes. The WCO, World Customs Organization, the explanatory notes are a couple €100 to buy. They do have an online system for searching the explanatory notes. That's the resource that's out there. Descartes has a customs info service that provides free access to global tariff information for users of export.gov. It's a limited visibility but you can actually look up with some level of confidence the different HTS codes in different countries and the duties and taxes that may apply to some of those. It's not considered to be entirely authoritative, but it's a good initial check. And then the ICPA, the International Compliance Professionals Association, has a resource library of past questions and challenges, including on software that they make available, that I would recommend as a place to check out if you're in the field and you're not already part of the ICPA. Okay, so we're just about the end here. We're good on time. I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to tackle here. But those of you that have stuck around this long, thank you so much. And we'll be definitely sending out the slides afterwards. If you want these CCS credits, make sure that you email train@startsa.org. There is one CCS credit available for this webinar. So make sure you get those sent over to us and we'll get them processed for you. All right, so one of the questions I have here is, you mentioned RPS screening. This is something that I believe our forwarder does for us. Is there something we should be doing differently to help them or make that better? Okay. Okay, so quick clarification on that. You said that the forwarder is doing screening for you. They're not doing screening for you. They're doing screening for themselves if there is any screening going on. And the problem with the forwarders as a layer of screening is even worse than the ERP example that I gave before, because the forwarder is going to have less visibility to the players in the transaction than you as the seller would have if we're talking about the export here. So in the example that I gave, the forwarder filed the EEI based on the SLI that they received from the US exporter, which was made from the data that was put in the ERP system. It had none of the context of the emails or the other correspondence that went on, the other phone calls that happened. So they're going to have less access to information than you've already got. So their screening is going to be less effective no matter what, just because they're further down the food chain. So don't rely on your forwarders to be your screening solution, unless you're specifically contracting them to do so and you're providing them the tools and the instructions in order to do so more effectively than just screen my shipping documentation. I recommend for restricted party screening, I recommend a kind of a twofold approach. Use software absolutely to do automated screening. There's absolutely no harm in doing that. It can only help you be more secure. But you need to pair it with audits for sure, and also training for sure. If you're not training your sales staff in particular to recognize the red flags, BIS puts out red flags that you can look at and see what sort of things are concerns when dealing with foreign buyers. But if your people don't know what to look for, you're absolutely not going to catch it in your role as trade compliance, in your role as logistics, and certainly the forwarder is not going to be able to catch it for you. So have software, but also have robust training and also have audit and accountability in place for that. And hopefully that answers that question. And here's one I see a lot. It says, I barely have time to do the work in front of me. I'm not sure how we're going to add in auditing. Okay, so that's a legitimate point. And as I mentioned, we're being asked to do more and more. How can I stand here and say, well, you also need to audit? And I can say that I do feel your pain. It's something that we all kind of have to wrestle with every day. The resourcing limitations that companies have today, especially in the field of trade compliance, make it almost essential to have software in the first place. And the more software that you put in place, the more important your audits have to, the more robust, the more integral your audits are to your process. As you trust your software more, the more you have to check it more. You have to actually subject it to evaluation and really figuring out what it's doing and if it's creating things like systemic problems. If software is just a repeating service that you have, most mistakes can be repeated over and over again and never get caught if you don't have an audit program in place. I've helped companies with several disclosures that had been ongoing. Errors have been ongoing for 3, 4, some cases 5 years, and they have to go back and declare all those errors to customs. In many cases, paying a big duty bill in the process, plus interest, almost never paying less duty, certainly not retroactively, and definitely not going forward. Those circumstances come up. Software creates that systemic repetition of the problem, and that's why auditing is so much more important. So yes, you're resource starved and you're relying on software more and more. There is a breaking point. You have to find a way to get those resources. Convincing senior management, convincing your boss to recognize that more resources need to be brought to bear, whether that's more dollars, whether that's more people, whether it's hiring an outside firm to do audits for you. Which, quick shout out, we do that. If you guys want to hire us, we do audits. Those are some of the ways that you can at least shortcut the process. Hiring another person may not be feasible given the job market, given the resource market in this field in particular. But also keeping somebody on and keeping them trained is hard to do, and making sure that they're going to stick with your organization. So for those reasons, outsiders are sometimes more attractive, or offloading your rote and routine responsibilities to a junior staffer so that you can focus on the audit. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of approach that problem, but I know from experience that disclosures are far more costly than implementing an audit program. And you want to avoid that. And you certainly want to avoid getting a customs audit because those are infinitely more risky for your company. So yeah, I don't have a fix for you other than convince somebody to give you more resources. Sorry. Okay, we're at the end of my questions, and I'm not seeing any more submitted. So we're gonna end a little bit early. Everybody gets a little bit, a few minutes back. I want to thank you all for your time again, for sticking around. Send the email to training@startesa.org with your CCS ID numbers, and we'll get you those credits. And we will send an email out after this webinar with these slides for your reference. All right, talk to you all soon. Bye.